Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of SuperNova Commencements. I'm your host, Kashi, Sehgal. We have a great show today, as always. So let's kick things off. We are talking about urban planning and smart cities and innovation today. So I thought, since we do our your career powered by data segment every week, we would talk about architecture and planning. That's the search term within the Steppingblocks framework. And Steppingblocks is one of our partners. They have 100 million people worth of data, and so they have lots of interesting things about careers, so look them up. But when we are talking about architecture and planning, they say that the most common education background for that area is a degree in architecture. That kind of makes sense. There are 322,000 people in the United States in this area. And the average age of the industry is 40. So it's a little bit older than some of the other industries we've talked about. It's 49% female. So a lot of the industries we've talked about over the last several weeks have been majority female. So this is another interesting perspective. It's more male-oriented. Top skills. So AutoCAD, which is a kind of software that you use to build models and make representations of things. Architectural design and sustainable design, which we're going to talk about. Skills that make the most, since you always are interested in this. Architecture, a LEED professional certification. Look that up. It's interesting. And leadership in energy and environmental design certification. So also very interesting. The schools that are, I guess, most represented, Cal Poly, so California Polytechnic, Virginia Tech, and UC Berkeley. And our guest today went to UC Berkeley. So there you go. There's an example. All right. So talking about our guest today, we should just bring her on screen, right? It's time. So let me pop her in. Hi, Debra.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. Okay, everyone. Debra Lam is amazing, first of all. So she is Managing Director of Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation at Georgia Tech. And she's also the founding executive director for the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. We're going to talk about all of those things and what the heck that means. All right, no problem. I'm going to kick things off. So Debra, could you please tell us where you're from? Where did you go to school? And what did you major in?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me to the show, Kashi. I really appreciate it. I was born in New York, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for most of my childhood. And I went to college in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University. And I was thinking that at that point in time, I wanted to be a diplomat. So I did the School of Foreign Service, was trained in international affairs and politics and the world order, and was leading that stuff. And at a certain point in time from doing international affairs, which I still love, I realized that actually there's stuff that I can do at the local level. Like I can actually make a bigger impact at the local level. And for me to do that meaningfully, I needed to get more schooling and education, as you talked about. So I then did a degree in public policy at UC Berkeley, where I majored in public policy with a focus on sustainable urban development. And that was the early part of the education. And I think I've been continuously learning ever since. So that the learning never stops even after you get your degrees.
That's true. That's a theme we hear a lot. It's continuous learning. And in order to grow, you have to learn. So, Debra, can you tell us how you got from school to where you are today running this Inclusive Innovation Institute and like all the things you're doing?
Yeah, so I did my thesis in Berkeley, and you're right. I did it in public policy, but I did take a lot of classes in urban design and policy and city and planning. Um, but I did my thesis on eco cities, green cities back in the day, right? And I was lucky enough to then get my first job out of grad school working for one of the design engineering firms that did eco cities and green cities, Arup. And they are globally headquartered in London. So I moved off and lived in London for the first time. And it was just fabulous. I encourage everyone, if they have a chance to go abroad, not just to visit, but if you really do get a chance, living abroad, I think takes it to a whole other dimension. So you can see that the international affairs passion that I've always had still kind of resonated in terms of this part of the life. But I actually ended up working for the urban design team at Arup, working on sustainable development framework. So every master plan, needed to think about sustainability and how do you really integrate it from the various engineering disciplines. So we kind of worked together to translate, what the transportation engineer was doing, what the waste and wastewater engineer was doing, what the energy engineer was doing, and kind of put it together in a holistic framework to do sustainability. So that was just a great kind of foundation. I wasn't smart enough to think about engineering, but I got to work with some really, really smart engineers and think about how to integrate that into a sustainability lens. And from there, I got moved into Hong Kong, where I worked for the East Asia headquarters for Arup. And I was placed in the management consultant team and did a lot of work in East Asia. And then went back to London in energy consultant and really drove some of the climate change work for Arup. And it was just a really great time for me to be a consultant, because I got to work on so many great projects and learned a lot depending on the locality and the discipline, and just worked with some really very smart, dedicated folks. But the limitations of a consultant is that, you are providing recommendations, providing a proposal, but ultimately it's the local government or, the client, if you will, that ultimately implements that project or that recommendation. And, you move on to the next project. And, at any one point you have many, many projects to deal with. But I got a chance to I got an offer to go back to Pittsburgh to become the first chief of innovation and performance. And that was an offer that was very appealing because it was a chance to actually implement all the recommendations that I was providing as a consultant into the city government and into action. And the thinking was, one, even if I fail, then at least I know how I failed, and can learn from that. And two, it was just a really good chance to, give back to my hometown and really support that progress. Mayor Peduto was going to be a new mayor, and there's just so much energy and excitement. And three, it goes back to local action. So, going back to, at the end of the day, I really do think action can happen at the local level. And so my parents were thrilled to go back to Pittsburgh after so many years living abroad. So it was a really good timing to go to Pittsburgh and serve as that chief of innovation and performance.
Yeah. Okay. So there are so many things I want to ask you about. One of the things that I think would be really relevant for students, before we really dig into your background and like some of the really cool things you've been doing, you talked about working with all these different groups and having to really, I guess, get buy-in and really coordinate. Students do a lot of group work. It's the bane of all student existence, right? Group work, group work, group work. How do you navigate that successfully? What does it take to really operate between groups and within groups effectively? What do you think?
That's a very good question. I think it's really important to work in groups, and I don't think it's something that you can avoid out of college or grad school. Business school, public policy, like naturally, so much of your assignments are based on group work. And I would say even in my current job, my work is based on group work. There is just this natural inclination to work together as a team versus any singular individual doing work. So, there are obviously advantages and disadvantages to group work, especially depending on your type, your personality type. I am one who actually really enjoys the group work because at the end of the day, I think for all the work that I do, it cannot be done singularly by me or anyone else. I think it's too complicated, requires too much resources. There's different capacities and expertise. And so it's really important to pull together the best minds. Naturally, of course, there are inefficiencies to it. There's natural conflict. There are just ways that, one prefers to work. And so all those things you have to take into account and incorporate that into your group work. But I don't think the easy solution is not to do it or to avoid it if you can. It is really to kind of understand those challenges and those limitations, but really know that hopefully the benefits outweigh those challenges when it comes to group work.
Yeah, I agree. And partnerships are groups and groups working together. And just as an example of how the world is going, the world is working more through partnerships now, I think. And you're running as, the founding executive director of this Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. Partnership is actually in the name. So forever you're going to be doing group work. So it's unfortunately, it's something you need to get good at.
Yeah.
Figure out how to navigate for yourself.
And I think you pick and choose, right? There are some things that you should be leading and taking charge in, and there might be some other things that you are following and supporting others on. I don't think you're always going to be the leader, and you're not always going to be a follower, and it's based on a complementary skill set and expertise that everyone has. And as long as you know that, I think that's going to make you much more successful. I never go I think I go into any room or group thinking there are a lot more smarter people than me, or people that have different things to contribute than I do. And I just need to figure out what those things are. And then think about what I can also contribute to make sure I'm, a valuable member to the team as well. And so you just kind of match those synergies up.
Yeah, that's a very real statement. A lot of us go into situations and feel like we're not the smartest person in the room, but that's actually kind of a good thing. I mean, you want to learn and grow and be stretched by the people around you. So it does make you better. So don't be dismayed if that's how you're feeling within the group. You definitely have something to contribute. Okay, so we talked about sustainable development or a little bit. I mean, you did your thesis in the environmental realm. Can you talk about what sustainability is or sustainable development? What is that? And why is it important?
Yeah, I would say I take sustainable development from the most basic definition out of the UN, out of Brunel. And it kind of said that we will not inhibit the resources for future generations, right? It really talks about, the limitations of natural resources and thinking about how we can build a place that is better for future generations. and that they can contribute to it, right? And so it's a direct indicator of not just environment, I would say. It's, economics, environment, and social, the people, and that overlapping concentric circle that you think about, and how all those things can come together. So in a very traditional kind of economic development sense, you're very much based on GDP, right? Like how much growth, how much money, how much accumulation of assets that you're trying. But whenever you think about that traditional economic development lens, you don't really account those externalities, those public good. So as you are growing in GDP, are you harming the air, the water? Are you taking resources from nature that aren't fully being accounted for or weighed? And in that process, are you jeopardizing the future growth potential of others, or potentially other species, other people, other environments, and how does that affect the social impact, right? So I really think about it as a holistic lens to think about growth is important, but growth needs to be sustainable, it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to account for the impact that you would have, not only in the immediate sense, but also in the longer sense, and then those secondary impacts that could result from any choice that you make.
Yeah. So I want to get into smart cities, because I think smart cities are really cool. And I'm assuming that the work that you did earlier in your career informed how you got into the smart city arena. I mean, isn't it kind of similar that, you're trying to better a city and now you're doing it through technology? Can you talk a little bit about what smart cities are for students who don't know?
You're dating me a little bit, but yes, I do think this is like something I've been doing for the past 20 years or so, right? I mean, it's something that it's a sexy term right now, and it's a new term, but I don't think it differs from the principles of sustainable development that came out of the 70s, that whether you call it green cities or eco cities or smart cities, I actually think it falls all under the same kind of rubric, which is a continuous improvement process for, communities, and equipping them with the tools and data and technology for them to improve the quality of life. So whether you think about resilient cities or smart cities or green cities, all these kind of movements are thinking about how we can improve the quality of life for all citizens, and ensure that the life that we are pursuing, doesn't negatively impact the environment or other fellow citizens, and is really moving forward in terms of general humanity and progress. And in the past, when we thought about eco cities or green cities, we put on more of an environmental lens, in terms of calculating carbon emissions or, water pollutants, etc. And now when you think about smart cities, you think about just wider tools that you can use to address that. So whether you're thinking about hardware or software or other kind of technologies and data analytics, it's just increasing your toolkit to include that, along with financial models and business models and policy all together. So it's very much just a way to empower local communities to improve the quality of life.
Yep. So a great example of a smart city innovation that I learned when I was first trying to understand what smart cities were was someone said, think about light poles, like in a city, walking down the street, you've got the light poles. Think about light poles that can smell, right? So that can sense things in the air that are going on and can warn you if something's coming, or, like there's gas in the air or whatever. That's an example of something that's a smart city technology, very basic, but can be really hopeful. So
Yeah, I would say that I would flip that a little bit, and I would always start with the problem that's plaguing any community. And if it is, there is smell pollutants that are plaguing the quality of life, they're causing some ill health effects. And then you work backwards from there and say, if this is a problem and this problem is causing a lot of unintended health consequences or, affecting the biodiversity locally or preventing people from, doing schooling or work well because of the harmful smells, then you say, what are the different tools or technologies that are able to address that? Of which one could include a light pole or whatever you suggest. Sure. To do that. But if you start with like the shiny technology or object, then you're kind of missing the broader picture of improving the quality of life. Because I think we get kind of distracted by the shiny technology and think more about that versus what is that shiny technology affecting to be solved or trying to solve.
I use this example. I'm sure students, if you guys have listened week over week, you're going to get tired of hearing this example. But I often use the example or the quote from Jeff Bezos, where he talks about technology not being disruptive unless it's actually used. Well, that's true. Like, you can't just develop technology and think like, okay, great, this is so wonderful. It's not unless somebody's actually using it or if it's solving an issue or problem. And you don't know how to do that unless you first figured out what the issue really is.
That's well said, Kashi.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about innovation before we get to student questions because they are coming in. What is innovation? What does it mean to you? And as a follow-up, you're leading this institute at Georgia Tech called the Partnership, or I guess it's separate, the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. Isn't innovation inclusive? Why do we have to segment that out? Why isn't it inclusive?
So the first question is, what is innovation? And to me, again, it's a process, right, versus an end state. Some people think like you innovate to innovate, and therefore you are innovation. But I really think of it as it's an act, and it's a way of thinking, and it's a process, and it's thinking about ways to go outside the box, whether it is a process in terms of how you do it, or thinking even a deeper level of why you do the things that you do. And just being in local government or even being in university or maybe in other sectors, there are a lot of things that we do. And the reason why we do those and the response I would get is, well, we've always done it this way, so we will continue to do it this way, right? Like the thinking isn't well, why do we do it this way, and what does it bring in terms of benefit or impact? And I think that type of innovation thinking helps us go beyond, right? And ultimately, you innovate to improve the quality of life again, right? You are really thinking about, well, what if we tweak the way we do things, or what if we question the way we do things, and if we do it a different way, would it produce a better result? I'm always very critical of people who are very good at criticizing, right? So, oh, it's too slow, or this is terrible, etc. And it's very easy to criticize. It takes a whole nother level to think about what we can do about it. And I think that's where inclusive innovation comes in. So a lot of the traditional innovation happened to certain sectors or demographic groups or classes of folks. And they, created a lot of huge, I would say, gains in terms of what they were able to develop in technology or product. And that was great. But what we found was that when you had a small portion of people or a small area benefiting from it, or a small sector benefiting from it, you left a lot of other people out, and they didn't necessarily get the benefits. And so when we think about inclusive innovation, we're thinking about increasing the access and opportunities for more sectors, geographic areas, people, to get involved in improving the quality of life. And certainly when you think about inclusive innovation, you would think naturally innovation has that. But it's not necessarily there. And maybe at some point, we will put ourselves out of the business when you naturally have included and habitualized that, institutionalized that. But until we get there, I think it's really important to raise the consciousness and the mindset of ensuring that when you are innovating, you are trying to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, so important. And something you said that I think is really interesting, and we should just pull out real quick. When you criticize something, make sure you have an idea that you think you could offer in place of whatever it is you think is not right. That will make you infinitely more useful and your feedback infinitely more valuable as you go through your career. So I think that is just a really, really important point, and I don't think it's pointed out enough. So that is a nugget for y'all. Okay.
Well said. Well said.
Well, you said it. Okay. I have a few more questions. So we're talking about innovation. Real quick, what do you think is the biggest innovation that's happened in the last year or so? Like maybe because of 2020 or, something.
Yeah. I tend to stay away from, again, the shiny technologies, objects, because again, I think those are just, deviate from how I think about smart cities. I do, though, think about the barriers to entry being lowered, and how, on one hand, we're increasing literacy in general in terms of our understanding of data, but also our understanding of technology. But also, we're decreasing the barriers to entry in terms of social economic conditions or assets or ways to connect. And what you said, which is applicability, right? Like if you are seeing more and more people feel comfortable and applying this and incorporating it into their life, that results in better decision making and improved quality of life, then that's kind of where I am excited for and motivated for in terms of going forward, in terms of technology and smart cities.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. You lived in London. You mentioned that. You also lived in Hong Kong and a few other places. As a student or even as an adult, I would feel like that's a big leap. Why did you decide to make that leap? Like, did you feel like, were you always called to live abroad, or was it kind of?
Yeah, for students, I started out very small, right? So like, I knew when I was in Pittsburgh, I didn't want to go to school locally. And the farthest I could really realistically think about my mindset was a 4.5-hour drive to go to DC, right? Like I started out really small, I would say. And I thought of this as, well, if worst case scenario, it was terrible, I can go back home for the weekend. My mom can do my laundry. Like I will still be close enough that I can go back home. Right. And then from there, I was like, okay, I'm going to go grad school now. So maybe the next leap is, a 4-hour flight across to California. And that seemed manageable to me, so I wouldn't say it was that I'm particularly brave or thoughtful. It was incremental in terms of my courage to go beyond my comfort zone. And from California, it was easier. So, you might say like, oh yes, she did all this international abroad, but, it started smaller. in which each step, I think I gained more courage and comfort and pushing my boundaries and not being afraid of not knowing, the language or the culture or the environment, because I knew that I could work within that framework.
Another great point. So incrementally pushing yourself, pushing your boundaries. It doesn't have to happen all at one time, but stop and really think about something you did do and how that was courage building for you. Because it's all confidence building if you allow it to be.
Yep. And I studied abroad junior year as well, and over the summer in college. And again, it wasn't, living there permanently, but again, I did it for a semester or for a summer. Mm-hmm. So I always knew an end date of when I would go back. And so that timing was also an important part to all this. And I think it's to the students out there, it's a lot easier to do when you are a student. You don't have the same responsibilities and obligations that you might have when you're older. You are more flexible. Like I stayed in hostels when I first, traveled, and, I didn't have the same type of requirements. You just put me in a suitcase and I would go, I think there's more flexibility to students traveling and going. And again, this is a unique time, but when we get to a place where you can travel again, there are certain freedoms that I think students have that, as we get older, I probably don't have the same freedoms.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay. I'm reading questions that are coming in. Okay. Let's get to some. All right. Here's one specific to smart cities. From Urgin. He says, the concept of a smart city sounds interesting. If I was going to specialize in a particular part of the field or industry, what should that be? What is the most relevant major?
So that's a great question, Urgin. So I will say that, there are very little smart cities majors or minors right now, right? You can't really graduate with a degree in smart cities. And I think that's good, because I just like, I don't think, only smart cities majors or minors can do smart cities, like the same as in architecture or other degrees. I do think smart cities is more inclusive, and it actually encourages more multidisciplinary thinking. And so I would say any degree that allows you to that teaches you very good analytical skills, because ultimately it's about thinking, and very good writing and communication skills, because we talked about earlier about partnerships. Smart cities is an area that, really supports and encourages connections with multiple stakeholders, multi-sectors. And so just those good communication and writing skills are critical. Those good analytical skills, whether you get it from engineering or the sciences or even in the social sciences, through just knowledge of literature and texts, allows you to think outside the box. When we say about innovation, it allows you to critically think about processes and outcomes and systems in a way that I think is beneficial to smart cities. And, we go back to the teams again. I really encourage, multidisciplinary teams. It doesn't live only in engineering or only in computing, or only in public policy. It is a way for you to think critically about the issues and then think about the different tools that could be applied to address those issues.
Yep. Yeah. Great advice. And there's that teamwork again. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Tyson wants to know, do you really use anything you learned in school?
I do. at Georgetown, we had a pretty rigorous program to do foreign service, and I took a lot of economics classes, and I obviously did a lot of political science and language. We had to graduate being capable in a second language, and I actually still use those kind of skills. And then, of course, in public policy, it's even more fitted because you are learning about, local government and sustainable development. And so I do use those skills. And I actually am very grateful for both universities in terms of providing that kind of background and basis for my current job and my past jobs.
Interesting. Lori would like to know if you use a process to brainstorm and come up with new ideas.
If I use a process?
Yeah. Like, is it like you think about it in the shower, or are you like, do you sit down and really take out a piece of paper and just brainstorm for an hour? Like, what's the process?
There's a lot of different processes. I think I'm not limited to one, but I think it goes back to what I've learned. But I'm sure all of there's a certain kind of design thinking that I find quite valuable. User thinking, that user-centric thinking, to think about from the user perspective, or how would they see this? How would they navigate this? I think those are really great ways to do it. As much as we talk about technology, I think there is some simple whiteboarding that's helpful in terms of just putting it all together. Mm-hmm. But I also talk to a lot of people, I just to brainstorm. And I think those water cooler moments, or just those moments of talking, Kashi is a really good example of, if I have a really good idea and I want to brainstorm with someone smart, I will give her a ring, and she will provide some really good insight. And I think those kind of things are really important to the thinking. Like, you don't need to be so agenda oriented or outcome oriented. Like, I might talk to Kashi and nothing could come out of this idea immediately, but you're building it, and later down the road something might come out of it. So I wouldn't say that with each brainstorm or whiteboard or journal entry, you need to get something immediately out of it, but it's kind of like a marination. I do very well marinating on this topics. Just, my response times tend to be slower. I might not be as immediate, but I am marinating on issues or ideas, and hopefully that process helps me improve upon it.
Yeah. First of all, we call each other. And the other thing is, I love that brainstorming doesn't have to be about the outcome. I think that's really important. So much of life you hear is about process and the journey. Well, that's also true for brainstorming. So, don't be so outcome oriented. You don't have to come up with a good idea. Sometimes just a good brainstorm session is just thinking. Mm-hmm. And talking and sharing. All right. Preeti wants to know, what is the coolest smart city innovation you've seen, and what is coming? Do you get this question a lot?
I do. And I always have a similar answer, which, again, the coolest ones are ones that I'm able to see impact, right? When there's a stronger process, when there's real impact to the community. And it could be high tech that's used, or something that's very low tech. There's a lot of good things happening in the no code movement, as that requires very little tech, but it is about, having a way to lower the entry barrier, having more people involved, empowering those people to be entrepreneurs and do more. Like, it's not necessarily about technology or the so-called being smart. It is very much about, what you're able to achieve and accomplish, whether it's in outcomes or process, that I find it's very exciting. The other thing I would say is that at this point in time, there are very few like smart cities, as in the whole local government jurisdiction. If we define cities, I think there are, demonstration areas, different verticals that might be doing some interesting things. But the way that we think about a city, as in the whole local government jurisdiction, really pushing forward together, is still like a process that we're still working on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, 2 more questions. Kai would like to know, how do you know that this is a good one. How do you know that your ideas are good? I think a lot of my ideas are good, and I don't necessarily know where to start.
Oh yeah, honest feedback. You actually ask people that you trust and people that you respect, and aren't afraid to give you that potential criticism, or really give you that honest raw critique of that idea. That's why I think it's really important for anyone to have a brain trust, if you will, people that know you, know about what you are doing, and then for you to be ready to embrace their, I wouldn't say embrace, but be ready to accept what they have to say, right, uncritically, and for them to be unconditional in terms of that critique. I think that's a great way to start that process. And I would say, if the majority of your brain trust thinks it's a great idea, then I think you can move on to the next step. But you can start with a smaller inner circle, if you will.
And maybe one idea at a time. You don't need to do all of them at the same time. You will burn out. All right, last question. Catrice would like to know, who inspired you the most on your journey and why?
So I can do professional, if I just do that part. I've been very blessed with some really great work mentors, and I would say these people were unafraid to let me try things, and unafraid to promote me and celebrate my success. They were very much willing to stick their necks out for me, knowing that, and accept the potential that I could fail, or not succeed, and be willing to do that, but also in a position where they were truly happy to celebrate my success when it did happen. Like, I think those are great mentors. People who, again, go back and give you the honest feedback, are willing to take risk for me, and really able to share and reflect when things didn't go well, and learn from, but also really happy if things did go well. I think I've been lucky to have a few people like that in my life, to kind of guide me in my career.
Yeah, it's good to find those people that you can develop a relationship with. And that's really what mentoring and advising and all of that is about, is developing a relationship. And then you can go to them with kind of whatever. And it's very helpful.
Yeah. And again, with the students, like, it even starts with the professors too, right? Like, it might not be a work person, but I had some really good professors that, offered a lot of insight, even though they were never in the same field that I was in, or would know too much about where I wanted to go. I think they still offered a lot of good insight.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are out of time for today. And so, Debra, we really want to thank you for being here. Students, we want to thank you for being here as well, and spending, your lunch hour with us. Hopefully you're eating something good. Don't forget to sign up for our mailing list. Go to our website, supernovacommence.com. You can find us on the web everywhere at #SupernovaCommencements. You guys know this. We've got internships, grants, and a few other fun things coming your way. So get signed up. Next week, our next show, we have Ambassador Mary Ann Peters joining us. And she is the past Chief Executive Officer for the Carter Center. And if you tune in, you will find out where she was the ambassador to. You can look it up, but you should also tune in. Okay, Debra, do you have any parting words for our students today?
No, again, thank you. Kashi, you're doing great. I would say parting words are continue to listen to Kashi's show. She brings some really wonderful people, and I think you can learn a lot from it.
Well, we'll take that endorsement for sure. Thank you very much. Students, have a great week. Please make the most of this unique time. Some of you are in person, some of you are online learning. Doesn't matter. You can still do great things. Remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So be kind to people today as you go through your day and your week, and stay safe and healthy. We'll see you next week. Bye.